Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today we'll be talking about user-centric innovation, and joining us to contribute to the conversation is Satyam Kantanini. Welcome, Satyam. So glad you're here.
Thank you, John. It's a privilege to be here.
Do you want to share a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I have the privilege of studying three very interesting areas of work over my last 22 years of career. I studied design, engineering, and business. And so because of that intersection, I've been fortunate enough to kind of see how innovation works, especially in the context of user-centered side. For the last 8 years, I have co-founded the fastest growing UX firm in the country called UX Reactor, and I've been running it. So it's actually been a fascinating journey, and I call it the biggest experiment in my life. And have the privilege to also have worked with some very large Fortune, 1,000 companies. Was in consulting early years of my career. Worked with companies like Siemens, PayPal, Citrix, ran different design leadership roles there before obviously moving on to the entrepreneurial journey and then starting this. So that's kind of my high level. And I would just say that if there's one liner, as like I'm a perpetual student of the intersection of design, business, and technology. And that's what I get really excited about.
Oh, that's great. That'll be a great conversation. I guess maybe the first question then is, if it's not user-centric design, what is it? When companies aren't doing user-centric design and innovation, what are they doing? How are they approaching it?
So I answer this with an analogy, and the analogy I give is like everyone agrees that being fit is the right thing, but everyone disagrees on what's the right way of going about it, right? So is it nutrition? Is it exercise? Is it genetics? Is it sleep? Is it mental health? Everyone has a different philosophy to that. And because of which, and obviously it's actually the right answer is it's a collection of all of this, and it depends on every organization and on what is the key driver for them. So most people try and then not succeed, and then they give up. And user-centric innovation is the same thing. I've not found even one business leader who does not believe that this is a good strategy, but everyone struggles with it. And they struggle, they do make a lot of mistakes. And the mistakes, they actually, they lose a lot of money, they lose a lot of time. And in most times they actually, go up, belly up. And that's the way I see a lot of issues, or they get outcompeted by someone who actually has figured it out. So that's kind of where the thing is. But again, it's not because there's lack of user-centric focus. It's more so because they just don't know how to get there.
And so what are some of those, I guess, pitfalls then that people fall into when they're doing it wrong? And then maybe we can talk about doing it right. So what are some of those kind of key things that companies don't get it right when they're doing this that cost them the time and the money?
I think the first thing, they think of it as a people problem versus a mindset problem, right? So they're like, I'm going to hire 5 designers, I'm going to hire, and then I'm going to hire a researcher, but it's actually a mindset, an organizational mindset problem, a leadership mindset problem. And I see so many times like, hey, I have a team of 100 people working on design, but I'm not becoming an Apple, because you're not an Apple. You are not an Airbnb, you're not a Netflix that are user-centric and user-driven in all aspects. Whether that is how they extract data, how they act on the data, how they experiment on it. There's a lot of nuances to that. So again, they throw people on it. The second thing is they throw words on it. They talk about it, but they don't know how to kind of operationalize it. And again, so everyone, like I've seen so many organizations have in their value statement, customer obsessed, user driven. But what does that mean? Does that mean that anyone who joins the company, do they understand and empathize with the user the same way? Answer is they have built no systems in that case. So now you have, in today's world, we have thousands of engineers sitting in another part of the world, or thousands of teammates sitting in different parts of the world distributed, but they don't feel the same pain for the users that they design for or built for, and therefore they kind of take someone else's problem. Siloing is another big mistake. It's like you have to be driven by the user. You can't just be like, okay, marketing does its thing, sales does its thing, customer success does its thing, and that's where you actually inefficiently are canceling each other. So these are all the pitfalls that actually organizations consistently do, and they don't even have a common vision of what should that experience be, right? And nobody can articulate that, right? I stand when I talk to leaders, I say, just make sure that you ask anybody in your organization these 4 questions, and if they can answer that in a very clear and with a lot of clarity and consistency, you have a user-centered organization. The first thing is ask anyone in your organization who are your top users. Second thing is what are their top pain points and needs. Third is what are you doing about it? Doesn't matter which department you are, what are you doing about it? And the fourth is how do you know that you're going to achieve it? What measure is what's the measure of success? And if people can't answer that with consistency and clarity, you don't have a user-centric organization.
And so if you are in that position where you don't have one, then how do you start building one? What's kind of the framework to go about changing the mindset?
I think it's four key variables, and that's what I write in the book that I just recently published. The 4 things is it's the right people following the right process and with the right mindsets in the right environment. So people, process, mindset, and environments. So you really have to understand, do I have the right teams? Most organizations have a chief marketing officer, but do they have a chief experience officer who's thinking about every facet of experiences that get delivered to a user? And that the silos have to be broken by someone that says that when I call customer service, or when I actually work with professional services, or when I do self-service on the product, has to be a cohesive experience. So that silos don't get broken till you actually have a leader that's driving that. So that's one example of people, right? Do you have the right people that are extracting the insights and then propagating that from users and propagating in the organization? So that's, again, the second variable of within the people side. There's a lot of other aspects. So that do you have the right teammates? Do you have the right mix? Are they in the right incentivized levels, etc.? Then you have the process. Like, how do you make sure that you actually have constantly data coming in from users? What is innovation? Innovation is you identify a problem, you solve it, and then you take it to market. And that's how you make a product or a business, and so on and so forth. So how fast can you do that is actually what makes a mark of a successful company. So do you have a process that actually listens to the users, extracts that into the problems that need to be solved, build that in? Today, we have product managers and product leaders in companies who would go and talk to a user, and then user would say, and the user typically is the highest paying or the highest titled, and they would say something, and then that comes in and becomes a requirement, and then you invest all your engineering to make that happen. But that's not how it should be done. User-centered innovation is identifying needs that users don't even communicate, and then you kind of have to define a pattern. So that's why you need to have a process of extracting that, acting on it, measuring it, etc. Mindsets. The biggest mindset is like, is everyone thinking that they are part of the solution? That's what we call the extreme ownership aspect. It's like, do you have an outcome mindset? So I kind of call it 5 mindsets in the book. You need to be thinking experience, you need to be thinking design, you need to be business thinking, you need to be system thinking, and you need to think about outcomes. And so that's kind of also something that happens. So it's a systemic change, which is why you need a leader to drive that. And then more importantly, you need an organization that allows you to be highly collaborative, willing to experiment, willing to fail, willing to kind of engage with customers on a more active basis. But that is what is the mark. And when organizations get to that level, they are building billions of dollars of value. And that's what we see consistently, which is why is Apple the most valuable company in the world, while Samsung creates everything that Apple creates and more? Why is it that Tesla is the most valuable automotive? It's not because they make EV cars, because EV cars but they think about the experience of buying. They think of the experience of service. They think of the experience of charging. And they have thought through the whole experience ecosystem. And that's why they are actually where they are. And same with Apple, same with Netflix and so on and so forth, that they really think about the experience that everyone's going through.
And so I guess it's a challenge to get that feedback. So maybe we talk a little bit. Do you have best practices around how you're getting that data from the end users? Like, what's the best way to approach those studies?
So there's there's a few things, and again, I'll state it the same way as I stated in the framework. Do they have the right people extracting that data? Do you have the right process after you get that data? So I'll give you a couple of statistics, which is actually surprising in a lot of ways, that 40% of the products and features get shipped without even talking to one user. 35% of the companies fail because of product market fit. And both of them should never happen if you actually are in tune with who your user is and what the pain points are. So do you have researchers who are constantly studying and understanding what the market is, where the users are, what the journey is, what the biggest pain points are? And once that data is extracted, do you have the process to propagate that across your organization so you can activate the whole organization around that? So those are nuances that I would say there is actually a whole line of work with human. I studied something called human factors engineering way back in 20 years back, which is exactly understanding how humans, what are the needs, what are the pain points, what is the journey that they're going through, what are the different touch points that they have. All of that stuff can easily be done if you have the right people knowing what they're doing. And I think a lot of ways, that's what's missing in a lot of organizations. There are still organizations that don't have a solid research team. And the other problem is research is not talking to users. Research is there are three ways of data gathering. There is understanding what the pain points are that are not being articulated, which is what we call formative research. There is making sure that what we have built is validated with users in a consistent manner, what we call validation research. And then having sensorial data of constantly tracking what data is like, are the users happy? Is the experience getting better or worse? Is constantly having enough telemetry to understand whether that you're consistently driving to the highest level of outcome. So there's three levels of insights that you can gather. So building a right portfolio of that quality of insights is also important. So again, these are all aspects, as I said, it's a system that people need to understand, and once they operate in the system, then you can internalize why successful companies are where they are and why unsuccessful companies are not able to kind of leverage it.
Do you think companies are good at asking the right questions and even solving the right problem?
No.
And
So
what drives that?
So most times the company has a person with a senior rank who actually has an opinion. And a lot of times, in fact, one of the things we do when we run workshops, we say, keep your opinions aside, or if you have an opinion, state it as an opinion. State your assumptions as an assumption, just because a lot of time that gets misconstrued. And also every customer, whatever a customer says, is not going to be, is not always right. So you have to build patterns around it. You have to build, enough, weightage around, like, okay, it's not just because you're the biggest customer, because I could build everything for the biggest customer, but I may have the long tail of 1,000 customers who are willing to pay, who are not getting what they can get. And so those are nuances that, like, how do you extract that data and then leverage it? That's kind of where it gets very interesting. And that's where I would say that's the secret sauce.
And there was, I think there is a quote, whether it's true or not, but I think it was Ford, where they say if I had built what the people wanted, I'd build what was it, a carriage with more horses or something, versus building to the actual need. And I think that's what you're saying, is like the users don't always articulate what the problem really is or really know where the innovation is. So, like, how do you make that gulf, the jump between the gulf of what people are really saying and what maybe the market actually needs or wants?
See, I think it's a very, very good question. It's something that I get asked a lot in this line of work, right? So it's like if only Ford had asked people what they wanted, they would say, I got a faster horse.
Right.
But I think as researchers, we study not what people tell us, it's how people are acting. Because when you start studying horse as a transportation mechanism, you start realizing that horses can only go a certain speed. Horses get sick. Horses actually can only carry so much load. Horses are actually somebody that are, you need food and water and consistent places. So there's a lot of those things that go with that ecosystem. And then you start understanding, okay, if I was to and people still have a need to take the whole family with them. People still have a need that they need to go further in a faster pace. And so these are all nuances that you understand. And this is the same thing I say. I started my career at a company called Siemens, and we were designing telephones or mobile phones. And as a researcher, I was doing a lot of validation research of saying, hey, can you add your phone number in there? Can you play a game? Can you navigate to this menu? And absolutely, every time the answer was yes, completion was 100%. People could do what they're doing, they're learning it. It was intuitive.
Mhm.
But when we started studying people and what I call portable devices, we realized that they have a camera, they have a personal,
Mhm.
communication device. They actually have a. Can you give me 1 second? I'll just, if you can take a break, I just, I think I have background noise. I'll just take care of that. Just give me 1 second. So, so when you start looking at, when you start saying like, as Henry Ford said, right, that if all I asked what users wanted was they would say that they need a faster horse. But it's not about faster horse. It's not asking the user what they want. It's understanding what they need. And when you understand that by observing them, by spending time with them, by engaging with them, and as I said, in the context of of a horse, you start realizing that horses get sick. Horses actually have an endurance issue. A horse can't take your whole family together. And these are nuances that kind of come together. So in the context of technology, right? So when I was at Siemens, we were designing mobile handsets at that point. This was early 2000, and we were researching consistently handsets. The handsets were like, can you make a phone call? Can you navigate the menu? And the answer was absolutely, you could do all that stuff. But with handsets, uh, we were validating it could work, but we were not really thinking about what the users needed. And that's when you start thinking about, like, if you studied the market, people were carrying a camera, people were carrying a personal information organizer, they were carrying, music device. And if we realize that if we can build a portable device, so you start looking at formative data and say, oh, what if I created a device that worked for them, which is what Apple did. And then when they created the first iPhone, it wasn't the best phone, it wasn't the best camera, it wasn't the best browser, but it built all of that together into an experience, right? And that's kind of when you start thinking about, like, that if I had those insights, I would have acted differently and I would have
Mhm.
built differently. And a lot of leaders and organizations don't have those insights, and therefore they actually screw it up. So they don't know how to ask the questions, they don't know what to do with the data, they don't know how to kind of build experiments around that. Honestly, today's world, cost of experimentation is close to zero. You can really build any experiment you want and put it out in the market in less than a couple of days, or less than a few days, and everything can be easily tested out, and with the market, and so on and so forth. So in this case, I mean, I just don't see why we cannot innovate. But that, to your point, a lot of times people just go ask what the user wants and then come back and give it to them and say, this is user-centered innovation.
And you touched on something that was the question I was going to have was how I assume that even with the data, like sometimes it's even not analyzed or not come to the right you don't come to the right conclusions. And so, how do you make sure or validate that maybe the conclusions that you're coming to?
See, I think most of the times you get data, and data gives you directionality, right? And
Mm-hmm.
directionality is how you then, based on directionality, you validate it, right? So if you know that you're going to go north or west, I mean, I'll just give you a navigation problem. Then you basically say, okay, am I going north? And does it still look like north? Does it still feel like north? And you keep validating it. And then if it feels like it, you keep moving on and keep making progress, which is what I call experiments, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and so the organization, a good organization should be experimental in nature. If I say that, hey, if I want to create a device that has all these things that come together, how fast can I create an experiment to test that, whether people will actually care about it or not? Honestly, I think I can pull together a quick prototype of that in less than 36, 48 hours, enough that I can get and validate that would that device even make sense, would they what that engages on that. And then if there is some validity to that, then I'll keep investing in it, keep going at it. An organization today, the traditional mindset is, I'm going to identify a problem, identify the right problem to solve. I'm going to spend a gazillion years to kind of get that right problem, and then I'm going to go and solve it. I think the better way is saying that I can identify a few problems. Can I create a few experiments for each of the problem and then go at it instead of identifying one right problem and one right solution? And I think that mindset shift is actually a big value creation shift that actually can immediately change, because all we are saying is which direction do we go, and okay, let's move forward. This is where the lean, agile, all these models have come in more and more actively, and obviously doing really well in organizations because you can fail fast and move fast.
I was actually going to ask about that. So, a lot of organizations, one of their biggest challenges is they don't move quickly, and it is difficult for them to be responsive to the market. So, how do you start getting the right process? You mentioned that was like the second or third kind of question is, do you have the right process? So, how do you start building in the processes and assessing your workflow to make sure you've kind of optimized it to get the outcomes that you're looking for?
Yeah, I think you ask a very, very interesting question, and I'll before I answer that, I'll actually state some root causes. A lot of times, organizations are not moving forward or not moving as fast and nimble because it predominantly comes down to the risk tolerance and the risk averseness of the leadership. And honestly, that's why I start with people, and the leadership actually need to believe that they need to shift, and there is that a relentless urgency that's there. If it's not there, it's a good to have. No one's going to change. It's a waste of time. Don't even go there. You will, and once the organization realizes that this is the way to move forward, then you move forward on it, and you move forward and by allocating the right people, supporting the right process. You don't have to change the whole organization. In fact, that's also an experiment. If you can argue, you can. All you need to do is pull out a couple of folks who actually are incentivized and aligned, and then let that run as a small experiment. You don't have to change your whole organization in one shot, and then see which direction you want to go, whether that's creating a net new product, whether that is experimenting with a new pricing model, whatever that is, you can always do that. But again, if the leadership itself doesn't want to change and doesn't want to do that, don't even waste your time. And I think that is a root cause. When I start talking to a lot of folks, they say all the things, but they just don't have the organizational wherewithal to do that. Which is why you either have to go all in, which is like this is your last ditch to get there, and that's where leaders kind of say, okay, fine, whatever it is, we will do, or they have to be very deliberate, and in which case, again, it needs a lot of clarity on leadership. But once that is there, everything is much easier. Right? To carve out a small team, to carve out an experiment, like you don't have to spend millions of dollars to do this. I mean, all you need to do is, as I said, you need to most companies need to know who their top users are, understand their top problems, and identify what you're doing with those problems, and start doing something about it in a measurable way. And honestly, that doesn't need to get, like, if it's a 10,000 person organization, even if it's a 500 person organization, it doesn't need all 500 to act on it till a later stage of maturity, but at least get 5-10 people to kind of start acting on it, and getting those behaviors in place. And that's when innovation starts happening, because first is identifying the right problem to solve, and solving the problem right is the second part. Both of that can be done with very small investments.
And so one of the things that I talk to a lot of people about is not doing too many things at once, right? As an organization, because then you have a lot of failed projects, right? Like when they're like, we're going to do a new ERP, and we're going to launch a new website, we're going to do this, and we're going to do the whole digital transformation in 12 months, all at the same time or something. Then they tend to fail because it's divided focus. On the flip side, I think about I drew a blank on his name, Jim Collins, who said, shoot bullet holes and then cannonballs, right? Which is what you're talking about, is testing a bunch of little things and see where you're going to then put your effort. So how do you recommend kind of balancing? Because I think they're both right. But I think you've got to apply them in certain ways to make it effective. So how do you avoid doing too much when you are out there trying to experiment and innovate, so that you're actually just not wasting resources across a bunch of different efforts?
So I think I'll go back to the root cause, right? Why do you need to innovate, right? Organizations innovate to kind of define their future business models. They innovate because they want to keep relevancy with their existing clients. They innovate because they have to. If they don't, then they will die. And today, and big, the competition is kind of kicking their ass, right? So whatever the reason is, there are different aspects to this. Now, each one of them, it has a different imperative. If competition is kicking your ass, and you basically this is the blockbuster story. If Netflix is kicking your ass,
Mhm.
right, you have to figure out a way to innovate out of where you are. And that, at that point, is it too much to do something? The answer is yes.
Mm.
You need to get as many bullets out there, and once you know where the enemy is, then you go and attack it with cannonballs, right, and put your
Mhm.
resources on it. But the point is, they just sat there and tried to build more structures around it, right? And that,
Mm.
unfortunately, is a classic business case, right? Now, if companies, so that's one aspect, and I think that's too extreme on one side. Ideally, if you're following this structure, you would have a team that's constantly, and that's kind of the philosophy. You should always be looking at horizon planning in terms of what's my, $1 million, what's my cash cow today, what's my opportunities for tomorrow, and then what's my big moonshots for. That's ideally the way you should think about any innovation. Now, on the flip side, you start looking at, like, hey, I want to go out and innovate because I have to build that, the future business model. At that point, you really need to kind of think about, investing in it, and putting in the time, effort, and incentivizations around that. That is where you start looking at, am I doing too much investment? Should I be investing in cash cow? As Clayton Christensen calls it in his Innovator's Dilemma book, that you always have to make sure your cash cow is your cash cow, but then you actually are also looking at future opportunities of investments, and so on and so forth. And that is what I say again, is run that with experiments. Don't need to run a few experiments and then and double down on those investments after
Mhm.
after you see signaling on that. What you don't want to do is run experiments and not doubling down, and that's where you lose that failure, because even failure teaches you something. But then if you don't have the organizational maturity to kind of take that forward, then you lose that collective knowledge. And a lot of times what happens is, this is where process kind of fails too. A leader is leading it and the leader leaves. With that leaves all the collective tribal knowledge. So do you have the process to kind of look at what experiments have you run, what have you not run, and so on and so forth. Now, some organizations are also looking at investing and building an corporate accelerator or a corporate incubation arm that innovates all these ideas, which is fine. But again, those are all experiments. But make sure those experiments are run from a user-centered insights perspective, that
Mhm.
you are still solving that user and that constituent that you have and that you care about. And that is what I think is the fundamental aspect that we constantly coach and teach people on, is like, is this insights driven from your users, from their needs, from the observation and the insights that have been gathered from them, not because you have an idea or because you believe that this, because that is now, it's not as an opinion centric leadership, and that will work maybe 1 out of 10 times, but at least user centered works way more than that.
Mm. It sounds like you're saying, though, one of the theme is that everybody's still aligned on solving the same problem. So even if you're running these experiments, there's still unity, and this is our number one problem that we're going to solve, and we just not quite sure how we're going to solve it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
In fact, any organization that says they are doing something because a competition is doing that, I can tell you is doomed to fail. Because competition is, if you don't know why you're doing what you're doing and what problem you're going to solve with it, and you don't have your own collective conviction on it, you will fail because you're always following someone. And this is what I saw for the longest while Yahoo, Yahoo was always trying to, copy Google. And you compete with your users, you compete with solving their problems, and that is when you constantly keep creating better and better solutions, you create better and better opportunities, and that's the moat keeps increasing. And by the time your competition comes to where you are, because they can copy what you're doing, you're already ahead of the game because you're already solving the next problem. And that is the secret of, when you start talking user-centered innovation, is what are you doing first? Do you know your user, and are you acting on it, and you're acting on it in a way that's measurable?
So how much do you think you should focus on your competition then? And I guess keep an eye out on them, because if you, I guess, if you're focused on your user and expanding that user base, that might give you a different result than if you're what's Samsung looking at Apple or something.
See, again, know your competition. I mean,
Mm,
don't be blind about it. Know your
yeah.
competition, understand what they're doing. They may be innovating in some other way of pricing or something else, but that's all fine. I mean, know where
Mm,
keep your competition close, but don't act on what your competition does. Act on what your users care about.
mm,
And for that, you need to know your users really well. You need to have that data in the right place. You need to have it, and the whole organization activated on that. Like people join a company, like let's talk about the onboarding experience for a teammate who joins a company.
yeah.
When they join the company, they're told everything about HR policies, HR structures, company policies, where the desk is. But how much time is actually going into telling them about what pain points they solve for the user? How much time are they spending with the users in the field? And that is a broken system of onboarding, because when they come in and they get activated, like this is what I'm doing for this user, this is how I am actually going to solve their problems. And once that gets activated in their mind within the first few days or weeks that they are in the organization, just think of how valuable they will be now with bringing their skills together. And many organizations fail right there, because they don't first, even if they want it, they don't have the data. They don't know how to kind of leverage it. They don't know how to build a program around it. HR doesn't talk to yeah, customer product or customer success, because they think they are all like support arms. And this is where inefficiency starts creeping in. And then as days and years pass, then that inefficiency becomes solidified.
Mm. Do you think that then even the organizational structure should be shooken up in the sense that, like, you have, like you mentioned, the chief marketing officer, and you have IT, and you might have technology, and then you have finance, and so it's very segregated. Do you think there's something to be said for changing the way, like it's a chief customer officer or something, of like changing the way that like we even approach the senior leadership positions?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I strongly would say that you need a chief experience officer. Now,
Mm,
I've studied the chief customer officer's role in a lot of organizations. Unfortunately, it's defined predominantly around their own customer success, customer support. That's it, right? But are they driving that into product? No, product is its own thing. Marketing is its own thing. And therefore, you need somebody who's actually looking at who are my top customers in the company, and am I measurably making an impact for them through marketing, through product, through customer success, through professional services. And that leader's charter needs to change. If it doesn't change, then it's just one more silo with a beautiful name.
mhm. Yeah. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I appreciate your insights. Would love to know what things you think we should leave top of mind for the audience.
I think that I'd probably call out, like, users centric. Anything is a success formula, right? And you can call it innovation, you can call it mindset, but it's a success formula. It actually works, and it insane business value, and which is why I keep saying that, if once you know your user, they will keep telling you more and more needs and problems to solve, and you can own that ecosystem. Your M&A strategy can define that, be defined on, can be defined. Your hiring strategy, your incentive strategy, everything gets defined, because as long as users exist, business exists. But you need to keep leveraging it as and activate around it. The second thing is, it's the right people, the right process, the right mindset, the right environment. Third is, while it seems a lot of variables, it's very easy to experiment with. And if people are not doing that in an effective but a deliberate manner, they're just losing out on this. And then sooner or later, they are just reacting to something that's happened with a competition coming in and taking over, right?
Mm,
Could the hotels not have built an Airbnb equivalent? They didn't. They just didn't think about it. But then Airbnb came in, and now Airbnb has hotels on it. That's kind of where the mindset needs to shift. But did users want to stay in exotic locations in someone's home? Absolutely. That need was always there.
mm.
But somebody didn't act on that need, or didn't anticipate that need. And that's where the secret sauce is. Once you figure it out, it's billions of dollars of value creation.
Absolutely. And where can folks find out more about you and your company and your book?
So the company is UX Reactor, so you can always look us up at uxreactor.com. They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. They can reach out to me at my email, satyam@uxreactor.com. And the book itself is on Amazon and pretty much every publisher, so every place that you can buy a book. It's called User Experience Design: A Practical Playbook to Fuel Business Growth. And I'm, again, there's a lot of ways to kind of get a hold of us. And again, if somebody feels passionate about this as we do, I'm happy to always talk to them. I'm just overall excited about this topic.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing your knowledge with our audience.
Absolutely. It's a privilege being here.
And to our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.